Hey guys, Tom Bramwell from Eurogamer here with another of our Games of 2013 videos. This time it's Paul Dean with his thoughts on Dota 2, so I will hand over to him.
Everyone will tell you that there is a particular way that you should play Dota 2, and that could be combining certain items with particular heroes, or building a hero in a certain way, choosing specific abilities at specific levels and then combining those with specific items to produce a very specific character loadout, combining those heroes with other heroes and playing a certain tactic in a certain way at a certain time in the game. And all these people are right, insofar as they are also wrong, insofar as they have all found ways to play the work for them. And this really is what Dota 2 is all about, and always has been about. On its surface, Dota 2 looks like a game that is something like a combination between an RTS and an RPG, which obviously calls back to its heritage as a Warcraft 3 mod. It looks very much like a game where you're simply trying to push your armies into the enemy base, knocking down a series of towers and destroying a bunch of other structures until you hit their ancient, at which point you've won the game. But really, this is kind of a canvas upon which a much more complex and a much greater game is played. You're not really playing an RTS game, you're playing something much closer to a kind of an RPG where you have very precise control over just a single character who is one member of a team, and the single map that is Dota 2. This isn't anything like Counter-Strike or StarCraft where there could be a series of different maps. There is just one single map. That is more of a canvas to play across. Think of it as something much more like a football pitch, an arena that is largely irrelevant because everyone is focused much more on the characters who are battling in that arena, the choices that they're making, the tactics they employ. This is what Dota 2 is all about. It's about personal choices. And it's very difficult for me to not launch myself on a tangent of personal interest to start talking to you about all my personal favourite heroes and the items that I like to use with them and why I think those are good ideas and how those have led me and my teammates to victory, the combinations of tactics that we've employed together. Dota 2 is absolutely full of items and abilities that manipulate the game in all kinds of interesting, intelligent ways, and this is why it's such an engaging game and why it has so much life to it, why it has so much variety. Although you may think of an RTS RPG kind of crossover being a game all about hitting people very hard and doing a lot of damage, and yes, the amount of damage you can do to the enemy is a factor, but equally as important is your ability to outmaneuver people, to stun them, to manipulate them, to slow them down, to ambush them, to surprise them. And the best teams are always the teams that are the most difficult to predict, the most difficult to follow, the most imaginative, the most creative. This is a game that has items like a personal favourite of mine, the Force Staff, which propels people forward suddenly. It can be an item that gets you out of trouble very quickly. It can be an item that gets somebody else into trouble. It can be an item that saves a teammate's life. It can be an item that has an almost comedic potential to it as well, as you throw people in and out of the area of effect of spells. But there are items that stun people as well, or that transform them into frogs, into sheep, into chickens. Items that make you invisible, that make your teammates invisible, that allow you to teleport across the map. And you'll see very, very quickly that there's so much in Dota that isn't just about hitting people hard. There are things about manipulating the game, manipulating the arena, manipulating the way you and your allies and your enemies behave. And this starts to turn the game into almost a kind of a puzzle. Certainly if you watch many of the professional games, Dota 2 has an enormous professional community. Obviously it's had a long history of being a popular game online and an esport of some sort, but Valve have very much pushed the international over the last few years, turning it into a very, very lucrative professional event. Watching any of these games, you get to see all kinds of tricks and tactics employed by people that are effective, partly because they are unexpected, because they are original, because these players are creative with the items that they use. I'm very surprised by Dota 2. I didn't expect to warm to it as much as I did, and this is one of the reasons why. It rewards experimentation, it rewards imagination. It rewards having a kind of a sense of fun and enjoying confusing, surprising, trapping your enemies as well. I first had a look at Dota 2 about 2 years ago now, and I kind of bounced off it. I found it interesting, but not particularly engaging. I thought it was something of an acquired taste, a bit like cricket, and it wasn't for me. I found the language a little unusual, I found the learning curve extremely steep, and I also found the community quite hostile. There is a notorious guide to the original Dota called Welcome to Dota, You Suck, and it both has that sort of vague sense of elitism and also that pragmatic kind of grounding in reality, where it says quite frankly to people, this is a difficult game, the community are not tolerant, you will struggle and you'll have to work through a lot to enjoy yourself. And this was arguably the bigger challenge that Valve faced adapting this game. It wasn't really about whether they could translate it, whether they could improve the graphics, whether they could create their own engine and update the game and pull it into the 21st century. It was about whether they could get more people to play it, whether they could make it profitable, whether they could make it worth their investment in it. And it looks very much now like Valve have. One of the greatest things about Dota 2 now is it's getting better, it's getting nicer. Valve have started moderating the community, they have started chasing people who are hostile, who are unpleasant, who are intolerant. And in doing so, they have grown the player base. Dota 2 has become incredibly popular, players are joining all the time. The network frequently suffers under the weight of players who are trying to get on it to play special holiday events, or sometimes just to play regular games with each other. It's a game that is fast growing all the time. And this is certainly in part not simply because it is a good game, but because with the addition of tutorials, with the addition of moderation, with the addition of more and more community focus coming in from Valve, it's more of an enjoyable experience. It's also quite unusual in that it's a game that forces you to see games through to the conclusion whether you are winning or losing. It's certainly possible to abandon any game of Dota, but abandoning comes with a penalty which puts you in a much lower matchmaking priority queue. To abandon a game of Dota is widely considered poor form. And this forces teams and players to see matches right through to the end where sometimes, and this isn't common, and you shouldn't consider this as standard, but sometimes they can turn those games around. For gamers who are used to logging into games, playing, logging out again, perhaps largely at will whenever it suits them, this is quite a different experience, especially when matches can last from between half an hour to perhaps an hour and a half. To really have to see a match through to conclusion is something much closer to the experience of a professional sports person, a player on a pitch who sees the clock ticking, who knows their team is losing, but who has to do their very best to the last minute, just because maybe, possibly, they may actually turn the game around. There may be hope. There is an element of balancing in Dota, and certainly with the many items available, with the many different tactics available, all the different hero powers, there is the possibility sometimes that clever play, that new tactics can turn a game around. If you manage to knock down a hero who's more powerful than you, if you manage to collect the gold that they have been carefully collecting, if you manage to just grab purchase on a game, you can turn it back in the other direction, and really says something for Dota 2's balance that this is possible. Now, I don't want to give you the impression that Dota 2 is now extremely accessible, that everyone who plays it is very nice, that everyone who plays it has a great time. I think perhaps like cricket or coffee, it may still be an acquired taste that for a lot of people is something that they don't enjoy at all. But it's a fascinating, singular game that is absolutely full of possibilities. The community is still growing at a dramatic rate. The community is becoming friendlier. Valve have really, really updated this rather archaic mod into something quite fascinating and built in all kinds of extra features, from replays to all sorts of stat tracking. And it's really worth having a try with. It's of course absolutely free, and Valve, I'm sure, are making plenty of money now from all kinds of custom items that people are buying for sometimes very large sums of money. But as a game that can be played entirely for free, that's not really like anything else there, although there have been many other MOBAs inspired by it, Dota 2 has to be, just absolutely has to be the best of them. It's really something that everyone should try, at least to see what they think of it. And maybe try a second time just to be sure. And maybe try a third time because their next game will be different again. It's not going to sit with everyone, but it is worth your consideration. And I would say it's definitely one of the most interesting releases of this year. And still a game that's very much going to grow. I can definitely say after playing it for a year, I still feel like I've barely seen the tip of the iceberg. There are so many things I can try, so many things I want to try, so many things I'm intimidated to even try. And that is not something that I can say about very many games that I've played.